Bots are stupid, you say? Well, I bet you I can be stupider, and I've got a couple hours of footage of this game to prove it. And to hammer home the point even more, I'm gonna spend a couple minutes of my time talking about this game while pretending that I actually know what I'm doing. If you haven't met your daily quota of dumb and or cringe, then stick around and listen to my ramblings and I promise you, you'll be golden. Alright, so I think that first and foremost, as always, I'm going to go ahead and start with the story because I generally think it's important for people to have an idea of what's going on, so brace yourself because this one's gonna take a while. There is no story. The end. That's not a joke, by the way. After the title screen, you just immediately get dumped into the first stage of the game, no introductory text or cutscene or nothing at all. The only dialogue in the game comes from Introbot 3000 over here, but he doesn't give you a story or an objective or anything, he's literally just a tutorial. He shows up in the beginning of a couple of stages in order to give you a new command or a motivational speech before yeeting himself into some spikes, more often than not, and afterwards you just have to go and make it to the end of the stage by yourself. And once you finish the stage, you just move on to the next one, however you please, with nothing else in between. If I really want to stretch the definition of story, I could go ahead and say that each world has its own name and achievement tied to it, so that's something, but it doesn't really amount to anything anyways. So yeah, the story is pretty much non-existent. You just drop from a pipe and you make it to the portal at the end, and that's about it. So I'm just gonna go ahead and move on to the presentation, and I think the graphics are perfectly fine. It is incredibly simple in terms of both sprites and animations, so it's no graphical masterpiece or anything, but it does its job perfectly fine. Gameplay-wise, I think the graphics do a perfectly fine job at conveying how the game works by letting you know what is a hazard and what isn't, and that's cool. Watching the robot traverse the stage can also be pretty neat at times, especially when moving fast or performing a lot of actions in a short time. But honestly, that's about it, because otherwise the graphics are so simple that I can't really think of anything else to say about them, aside from the fact that they do their job, and they do it perfectly fine. And to be honest, I also have very similar feelings about the sound in general. Most of the level tracks have a sort of factory-like ambience to them, and they're all rather similar to one another, and as far as I'm aware, the only other track in the game is the main menu track, and it's perfectly fine, sure, but it's no headbanger or anything. Sound effects are all crisp and nice and have that retro kind of feel to them, which I like, but again, it's no auditory masterpiece or anything. One thing I do want to note, however, is that the music occasionally transitions into a simpler version when you're going into menus or pausing the action during a level, and I think that's a pretty neat detail, all things considered. But otherwise, yeah, I can't think of much else to say about the sound, though that's partly because I don't know anything about these kinds of things, but, well, I just don't think there's that much to discuss here, considering how little music and sound effects there are in the game. Alright, so gameplay-wise, I think puzzle platformer is the most accurate genre for this game. Basically, you control this little robot in these platformer stages, and your job is to collect these red particles in order to power up the portal, which serves as the end of the stage. The puzzle bit comes from the fact that, rather than controlling the robot yourself, you actually have to write commands on the left of the screen here that the robot will then enact, and that's how you control him. The robot can move left and right, jump, stop, or use a grappling hook, either diagonally up right or left, or diagonally down right or left. Aside from that, there are basically two other commands, which are wait and repeat. The wait command will allow you to set how long it will take for the next command to be performed, and the repeat command will allow you to repeat a set of commands. It's really as simple as it sounds. And so it's up to you to make good use of all of those commands in order to grab all of the shiny particle things and end the stage by going into the teleporter. But of course, it's not as simple as it sounds, because the robot will, obey the laws of physics and everything. For instance, if you're able to get a lot of speed, say by picking up one of these booster things, you'll be able to launch yourself across the stage if you let go of your hook at the right time. The second world of the game has these moving platforms you can use to do much of the same, and the third has these sort of zipline things that you can hook onto for, well, more speed, of course. And the fourth and last world has these portals you can go into to get teleported, obviously, and sometimes you can use those in order to get a lot of speed. And honestly, I think it's pretty cool that you can finally look back at the entirety of your solution completely uninterrupted once you finally complete the stage. I imagine this is what it must be like to look at your own task of a game, except this time, unless you're really freaking good, your task is incredibly inefficient and absolutely terrible. Like I said earlier, the game has 4 worlds in total, and the first one has way more stages than the other 3, but you don't need to complete the entirety of a world in order to be able to move on to the next one. But even then, with no story to speak of, the game doesn't really have a traditional ending anyway, so completing all of the stages is only a matter of if you want to or not. I actually went ahead and did all of them, and despite being terrible at this game, I somehow managed to do it in just a little under 8 hours. So yeah, the game isn't really that long, and to be fair, it's not very hard either, because unlike a traditional puzzle, there's basically an infinite amount of solutions for any given stage in this game. I mean, yeah, sometimes you will essentially be forced to use a specific command in order to succeed, but it's not like there's ever only one way to do so. In this stage, for instance, you're definitely gonna have to use the hook if you don't want to just fall in the spikes and die, but you don't have to find the perfect angle and direction and everything in order to get all of the particles at once. Lord knows, I sure as hell didn't do that. I just spent a whole long while hooking and unhooking and repositioning until I finally collected all of the particles and made it to the portal through sheer trial and error. You can pause your solution at any given time in order to change commands, but only once that the robot hasn't already performed, otherwise he just spontaneously explodes and he has to start all the way from the beginning again. When paused, you can use these two buttons to slowly advance or rewind so you can try new commands and see how they play out without having to watch the robot die and start from the beginning all the time. There's also this tools button up here which will allow you to mess around with some settings like the speed of the game, or also letting you see the hitboxes on things like your robot and spikes and whatnot. Right next to it is the help button, which will let you see a list of all your available commands, and finally, one other thing you can mess with is the game mode, which is a bit weird. Basically, it allows you to change some of the game's mechanics to mix things up or just try out some real wonky stuff if you feel like it. You can turn on low gravity, or mess with your hook, or even give you boosted boosters, which lets boosters stack together for even more speed. I didn't really mess with these things personally, because they're more the kind of stuff I would like to experiment with on subsequent playthroughs rather than my first one, so I just stuck to default for the entire thing. I did sometimes increase the timescale to speed things up when I get tired of looking at my solution for the 17th time, and I also started showing hitboxes around halfway because this made it easier for me to see whether or not I was going to make it past some spikes and whatnot. And as one last note, when you complete a stage, the game shows you how long it took for your solution to make it to the end, and also how many lines of code you had to use, and it also compares your performance to a leaderboard. So if you're interested in rising up the ranks, you can go back and review your entire solution in order to make it faster or make it require less commands. The game also apparently gives you the option to watch your death replays, but it never seemed to work for me. It would just put me back at the beginning and force me to watch the entire thing all over again, so I'm not sure what's up with that, but just pretend it doesn't exist, I guess. And finally, the game also sports a level editor mode, so if you want to create your own levels or play other custom-made ones, you can go ahead and do that. I didn't make any stage personally, but I did want to try out at least one, so I just picked up the first one I could find, this stage called Factory_1 by someone named Pepsi, so I didn't realize soft drink companies made custom levels and bots are stupid. It was quite the doozy, let me tell you, much longer and more complicated than most of the regular campaign levels, but I did eventually make it to the end, even if it took a while. It was a pretty good level, all things considered, and it definitely wouldn't have taken me as long if I was good at the game, and well, I think that's my segue into my final thoughts about it. All in all, this was a nice little puzzle platformer, and I did quite enjoy my time with it, but well, I really wish I enjoyed it more, to be honest. Because honestly, controlling a character by giving it commands to execute rather than just, controlling them directly is a concept I find really interesting. Making the game be controlled in such a weird, roundabout way means that it naturally requires a different set of skills than a regular platformer or even a regular puzzle game, for that matter. And unfortunately for me, I just didn't really have the skills necessary for it, which means I didn't get that much out of the control scheme and it made things kind of awkward. I basically kept trying to play it like a regular platformer, and instead of thinking long term to find a half-decent solution, I would always just hyperfixate on the problem right in front of me and attempt to fix it any way I could. This led to a lot of brute force trial and error, where I'd spend a lot of time just adjusting the same values over and over again until I finally managed to get the game to do what I wanted it to. And rather than going for any cool or flashy movement tech or gimmicks, I would just always settle on the easiest and simplest solution to execute and try to improvise from then on. And every once in a while, something completely unexpected that nonetheless gave me exactly what I wanted would happen, and when that's the case, it kinda felt like I just randomly won through sheer dumb luck. And to be fair, none of these things are problems with the game, they are problems with me, but that still led me to playing the game in an uninteresting and sometimes even tedious manner. And that's why I said that I wish I could enjoy it more, because even though I can realize that it's a pretty good game, I just don't have the skills or maybe the mindset necessary to get that much out of it, and that leads to me not enjoying it as much as I'd like to, personally. But don't let my personal problems stop you from giving it a try if you think it looks interesting, because who knows, maybe you'll be able to pull off some really sick stuff you'll be able to feel good about. Hey, look at that, it's the outro, and since no one makes it here, I'm just gonna go ahead and get it over with because I'm tired of talking. Like or dislike, subscribe or unsubscribe, comment, have a nice day, thanks for watching, you know, all that stuff. Goodbye.